chandelier lights shimmered above the marble floor of the Langley estate, casting elegant shadows over the gathered guests. Laughter echoed, champagne flowed, and crystal glasses clinked beneath the hum of whispered gossip. In a tailored navy blazer and slate gray shirt, Luke Harper moved through the crowd with effortless charm. Every nod, every smile was calculated, practiced. But behind his calm eyes, the storm had already begun. Luke had never liked surprises, and tonight, despite the shimmering glamour of the celebration, he knew something was off. He felt it in the stiffness of Sarah's fingers when he took her hand. He heard it in the slightly too loud laugh from Ben Jensen across the room. He'd always been a quiet observer, but now he was watching everything. Ben was magnetic, as always, his black shirt unbuttoned just enough to hint at rebellion, sleeves rolled up to mid-forearm like a man who didn't care what anyone thought. He stood at the center of a laughing circle, holding a flute of champagne and basking in the attention. Luke's fiancée, Sarah, lingered just at the edge of it, her eyes betraying the faintest shimmer of discomfort, or was it thrill? Luke sipped his drink and smiled. Not a real smile, one of those subtle, practiced ones. He'd already read the messages, already traced the timeline, already built the strategy, but tonight wasn't for confrontation. Tonight was for theater. Then it happened. Ben, catching Sarah's glance, called out, "Everyone!" His voice cut through the chatter like a bell. Guests turned, murmuring with amused anticipation. Since our dear Sarah looked so radiant tonight, I thought, why not make this official? Gasps, laughter. Ben dropped to one knee, holding up a small velvet box. Sarah's eyes widened. For a second, she froze. Luke noticed the flash of panic, the flicker of guilt. Then she smiled. But it wasn't her smile. It was a rehearsed mask. And behind it, Luke saw everything he needed to know. Ben snapped the box open. Inside, nothing, empty. "Relax," he chuckled. "It's just a joke." Some laughed, some looked confused. Sarah let out a tight giggle, but Luke saw the tremble in her fingers as she adjusted her necklace. The room settled into a ripple of laughter. Luke, ever the gracious host, raised his glass. "Hi, I actually have something to say," he announced. Voice smooth, clear. The room hushed. Even Ben looked caught off guard. Sarah's hand hovered, unsure whether to clutch her wine glass or the lie she'd been living. Luke took a breath, measured and slow. "Since tonight seems to be about surprises." He paused, let it simmer. "I'd like to offer one of my own." The guests leaned in. A few lifted their phones, expecting a proposal, maybe an announcement. Ben's smile faltered. Sarah's face drained of color. Luke's gaze cut across the room like a blade. And then he smiled. The moment lingered, hanging in the air like smoke. Luke lowered his glass, his lips still curved in that same ambiguous smile. The guests, though curious, slowly turned back to their conversations, taking his words as a tease, something to be revealed later. But for Ben and Sarah, the unease didn't fade. It festered. A string quartet resumed their elegant arrangement in the background, and Luke stepped away into the crowd, letting the music cover the rising storm inside him. It hadn't started with a dramatic moment. There was no lipstick on a collar or perfume that didn't belong. It was quieter, subtler, a shift in glances, a hesitation in Sarah's voice when she said, "I love you." The way Ben started showing up at their apartment unannounced more frequently, always with a casual joke or a bottle of wine, laughing just a little too hard at Sarah's stories. Luke's instincts had whispered before the evidence shouted. One night, a forgotten phone left on the kitchen counter buzzed with a notification, just a soft ping that changed everything. Sarah was in the shower. Ben's name flashed across the screen. No preview, just a name. Luke's gut tightened. He didn't open it. Not then. But that moment planted a seed. And Luke was a man who believed in patterns, in quiet observation, in letting the truth reveal itself. He began watching more closely, subtle questions, slight tests, and then he made a quiet decision. He'd stop reacting emotionally. He wouldn't confront. Not yet. Instead, he started gathering. The first real piece came from a synced cloud account Sarah hadn't realized she was still connected to on their shared tablet. A folder. Accidental, maybe. Holding photos. Innocuous at first. A group dinner, a selfie with Ben and Sarah in the background. But then, a photo of them alone. Too close. Too comfortable. Then another. Ben's hand at Sarah's waist, her face tilted up toward him, lips slightly parted. It was no longer speculation, but Luke needed more than pictures. He paid a visit to an old college friend, Evan, a cybersecurity specialist with a knack for subtle retrieval. Evan owed him a favor. Within days, Luke had access to messages, hundreds of them, some flirty, others deeply emotional. References to Luke himself, casual mockery of his quiet nature, of how he'd never see it coming. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was layered in contempt. Still, Luke said nothing. He played his role. Loving fiancé, best friend, smiling host. But in private, he built a case. Every saved message, every time-stamped photo, meticulously organized. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about reclaiming power, dignity, truth. The most damning message came just a week before the party. Ben, after the proposal joke, he'll be humiliated. I bet he still won't do anything. Too much of a gentleman. It's like kicking a dog that just wants to be loved. That was the moment Luke stopped hurting and started planning. He didn't want a scene. He wanted clarity, finality, justice served cold. As he moved through the crowded ballroom that night, he paused briefly near the bar. From across the room, he watched Sarah whisper something to Ben. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Ben glanced around nervously, fingers tightening on his glass. Sarah smoothed her dress, trying to reclaim composure. They didn't know. Not yet. Luke slipped his hand into his blazer pocket, fingers brushing against his phone. The gallery folder was already open, neatly arranged. Tonight wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be messy. It would be precise, elegant, like the betrayal itself. The toast was only the beginning. The Langley estate glowed like a palace under candlelight, its chandeliers glittering above polished mahogany floors and velvet-draped walls. Waiters in tuxedos flowed through the room like shadows, offering oysters, caviar, and champagne flutes that never emptied. The string quartet in the corner shifted from Mozart to a sultry jazz standard. It was a night of elegance, wealth, and surface-level charm. Luke Harper moved through it all like a man, both inside and above it. He stopped to greet old acquaintances, shook hands with investors, laughed at a tired joke from a corporate executive he barely tolerated. But behind every smile, his thoughts remained fixed. The stage was set. And everyone in this room, Sarah, Ben, their circle of mutual friends, even the unknowing guests, were merely pieces moving toward a silent detonation. He could sense the tension rising in Ben's movements now. The once confident swagger had begun to turn stiff. There was an edge to his grin, a twitch to his fingers as he nursed his third glass of champagne. He hadn't spoken to Luke since the proposal joke. That was telling. Ben was buying time, trying to gauge if Luke had seen through the charade. Sarah, meanwhile, had retreated into performance. She laughed too easily, touched too often, flitted between guests with a kind of forced sparkle. The silver fabric of her gown shimmered with every step she took, but Luke noticed how she avoided his gaze more and more. When she wasn't actively entertaining, she kept her hands clutched, either around her glass or her clutch purse, as if anchoring herself. Luke stood alone by the grand fireplace, watching. The heat from the flames didn't reach him. His core remained cold, still. There was no more uncertainty, no more ache. What lingered now was calculation, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing the night would end on his terms. Earlier that afternoon, he'd tested the projection setup with the staff. A wireless connection from his phone to the estate's presentation system, built for toasts and company pitches, was all he needed. He ensured the files were queued in order. Photos, screenshots, a muted video clip of Sarah and Ben entering a hotel lobby, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. The truth neatly packaged. No commentary necessary. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. A message from Evan. All backup files uploaded, you're good to go. He didn't respond. There was no need. As the evening progressed, the conversations grew louder, the laughter more drunken, glasses clinked harder. A small crowd had gathered near the terrace, where city lights glittered beyond the glass. Ben, perhaps feeling the pressure of his failed joke, tried to regain control. He raised his voice again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, tapping a fork against his glass, "let's raise another toast to the man of the hour, Luke Harper, who somehow landed the most gorgeous woman in the room." Laughed. Sarah gave a tight smile, brushing a hand through her hair. Luke's jaw tensed for the first time that night, not at the compliment, but at the condescension buried within it. Ben continued, "Seriously, you two give the rest of us hope. May your life together be full of surprises." That word again, surprises. Luke raised his own glass slowly. "Well, since we're celebrating surprises..." His voice cut through the room like a well-tuned violin string. "There's one more toast I'd like to make." The room turned toward him. Guests fell silent, curious. Sarah froze. Luke stepped forward, phone in hand. "But before I speak..." I'd like to show you all a few memories. A hush fell like a blanket. He tapped the screen. The lights dimmed automatically as the projector came to life on the far wall. The first image was innocent, a smiling photo of Luke, Ben, and Sarah taken at a beach house retreat last summer. Laughter flickered, nostalgic, warm. But the mood shifted as the next slide appeared. A photo of Ben and Sarah, seated too close at a cafe downtown, her hand on his knee, his fingers brushing her jaw. Clearly intimate, clearly not platonic. Gasps followed. The next photo, more damning. Ben entering a hotel with Sarah at night. Another from the hotel lobby. Then screenshots of messages. Some were blurred out for decency, but the meaning was unmistakable. Ben's face drained of color. Sarah backed away from the crowd slightly, lips parted, eyes wide. Luke didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't rage. He simply narrated, calmly. These images spanned 4 months, he said. The messages even longer. I debated for weeks what to do with this information. I thought about private confrontation. Then I remembered something Ben once said to me in confidence. Luke looked straight at Ben. You said some people deserve to be publicly humiliated? You said shame is the only language they understand? A heavy silence gripped the room. Ben stepped forward. Luke listened. No, Luke interrupted, still calm. I did listen. I listened for months while you both lied to me. Now you can listen. The next slide was the final blow. A brief video, silent, showing Ben and Sarah exiting a hotel suite together, kissing before parting ways. Luke ended the projection. The lights returned. The room had shifted. What had been polished and elegant was now suffocating, tense. Guests stared in stunned silence, avoiding eye contact with Ben and Sarah, stepping away as if betrayal were contagious. Luke downed the rest of his drink, placed the empty glass on the table beside him, and turned. Well, he didn't wait for apologies. He didn't need them. He left them there, frozen in their shame, exposed beneath crystal chandeliers and high ceilings. Outside, the night air was cool, crisp. For the first time in weeks, Luke inhaled deeply and felt something close to peace. The door of the Langley estate shut behind Luke with a heavy click, muting the swell of shocked voices inside. He paused under the portico, the night air cutting cool against his face. The quiet was jarring compared to the hum of the party. A valet, confused and unsure whether to approach, hesitated until Luke gave a slight nod. Within seconds, his black sedan pulled around the driveway. As Luke slid into the back seat, the dull roar of applause, no, not applause, he realized, muffled accusations, perhaps even pleading, reverberated faintly through the mansion walls. But he didn't look back. Inside the estate, silence hadn't lasted. Sarah had turned ghost pale, her glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the floor. Ben had tried to laugh it off, tried to spin it as a prank gone too far, but the faces around him were unmoved, unsmiling, stone. His usual charm fell flat in a room now lit by betrayal. Sarah stood alone, hands shaking, mascara beginning to blur beneath her eyes. She scanned the room like a drowning woman looking for someone to save her. No one moved. Luke's digital justice had been precise, clean. Every guest had seen enough to know that this wasn't impulsive spite. It was preparation, it was patience, and most of all, it was proof. Whispers began to rise like smoke. I can't believe it. Wasn't she just talking about the wedding last week? Ben's a bastard. Luke must have known for months. People who once smiled at Ben's jokes now turned away. Those who toasted Sarah days ago now avoided her gaze. The illusion was shattered, and with it, their place in the world they'd built on lies. Sarah stepped forward as if to run after Luke, but froze in the doorway. What could she even say? That it was a mistake? That it didn't mean anything? The photos, the video, the messages, all of it screamed otherwise. Ben, meanwhile, tried to regain control, moving toward the nearest group of people. Come on, you all know Luke. He's always had a flair for the dramatic. This is just his way of... The woman stepped back, disgust in her eyes. You were his best friend? That shut him up. Sarah finally fled, not toward the driveway, but down the east hall. Somewhere to hide, to breathe, to fall apart. In the car, Luke remained silent. The chauffeur offered a polite, "Home, sir?" Luke didn't answer immediately. Home. The word tasted strange now. That condo he shared with Sarah was no longer home. It hadn't been for a while. It had been a beautiful lie wearing his name on the mailbox. No, he said finally. Take me to the promontory. It was a lookout point above the city, a place he hadn't visited in years. A quiet corner of the world where the skyline shimmered in silence, far away from crowded rooms and poisonous smiles. As they drove, Luke let his thoughts unravel. Strangely, there was no gloating, no satisfaction in the downfall of the people who hurt him. He had expected more finality, more fire, but instead there was just air. His hand drifted to his pocket, pulling out the phone. The gallery folder was still open. He scrolled slowly through the images, but this time they felt distant, like pictures from someone else's life. He deleted them, one by one. When the car reached the promontory, he asked to be left alone. The driver nodded and waited down the slope, out of sight. Luke stepped to the railing and looked out over the city. Streets illuminated in gold, lives moving, unaware of the battle just fought in an opulent hall across town. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the cold iron rail, and he breathed. The revenge was complete, the performance was over, but beneath the silence a question echoed. What now? That's the part no one ever talked about. The hollow after the justice. The stillness when the enemy is vanquished, but the wounds remain. He didn't regret what he had done, not for a second, but in place of fury, there was only the vast uncertainty of beginning again. He pulled out his phone again, not to look at evidence, but to open his notes app. He tapped a single line. Trust isn't something you lose, it's something you learn to live without. Then he locked the screen, slid it into his pocket, and tilted his head back to look at the stars. Far behind him, Sarah sat alone in a bathroom stall, dress bunched in her lap, heels discarded, her body shaking, not from humiliation, but from the realization that she had misjudged Luke entirely. He wasn't passive, he wasn't weak, he had simply waited, and when he struck, he left no survivors. It had been 3 days since the party, 3 days since the chandeliers dimmed on everything Luke once thought was real. The fallout had been swift and merciless. Ben was suspended from his firm pending an internal investigation, though rumors suggested the damage extended beyond personal scandal. Word had spread fast. Luke hadn't posted anything, hadn't said a word publicly. He didn't need to. The guests had done the job for him. Screenshots circulated, private messages became public whispers, and in those polished circles where reputation was currency, Ben Jensen's was bankrupt. Sarah disappeared from their apartment the next morning. Her belongings were gone when Luke returned, aside from a single envelope left on the kitchen counter. Inside was her engagement ring, still glinting, still cold, and a note with 2 words written in a hand that now looked unfamiliar. I'm sorry. Luke didn't reply. Not because he hadn't processed it, he had, but because her apology wasn't meant for healing. It was a formality, an echo after the damage. What unsettled him most wasn't the betrayal itself anymore. It was the clarity that came after. For months he had doubted himself, wondered if he'd been too distant, too absorbed in his work, too blind. But after everything he'd uncovered, he realized it hadn't mattered how good or bad he was. Some people betray not out of reason, but weakness. Because they can, because they lack the courage to face their own unhappiness with honesty. Luke stood at the window of a small hotel suite overlooking the city. He hadn't returned to the apartment. There was nothing left there for him. No meaning in the furniture they'd chosen, no warmth in the bed they'd once shared. Instead, he took space. For breath, for thought, for rebuilding. Had dinner alone each night, not out of sorrow but by choice. Solitude wasn't the enemy. Silence, he found, was where strength collected. One evening, he found himself people-watching at a cafe terrace in Midtown. Life continued as it always did. People in love, people arguing, people completely unaware that worlds could collapse while traffic lights blinked and coffee was poured. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He realized he wasn't broken. He had been betrayed, yes, humiliated, lied to. But he had also stood in front of a room full of people and held on to his integrity while dismantling 2 lives that had fed off his trust. He hadn't screamed, he hadn't begged, he had told the truth. And truth, he'd learned, didn't need to be loud to echo. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He let it ring, probably Sarah, or someone connected to the mess she'd left behind. But it didn't matter. That chapter was closed. As he rose from the table, he passed a woman seated nearby, reading The Stranger. She looked up for a moment and smiled. The kind of smile that wasn't a flirtation, just acknowledgement. He returned it, polite, brief. But something about it lingered. He walked away, lighter than he'd felt in months. Back in the hotel room, Luke sat at the desk, opened a new document, and typed a single sentence. Sometimes the end of love is the beginning of truth. He leaned back, closed the laptop, and exhaled. The story they wrote for him was over. Now it was time to write his own.